monitoring system, for example, for weather, or even long-term predicting in the case of climate models. This was an application to detect and to describe and to model a hurricane in the past. Or here, AI-supported early warning systems, even for tsunamis. On the left, that is a computer assistant modeling with a colored pattern of waves, illustrated the spreading wave in an NI-based predictive model. And on the right, these are the measuring data, spread and height of the wave along the overflight degrees of latitude that measured from an aircraft. And AI in general supports nowadays already sustainability by their monitoring systems and the coordination of the different tools, for example, monitoring the health of farms in a real time, or here monitoring water supply to protect fresh water, or the big monitoring systems for controlling biodiversity across our planet, or in the same sense, climate change. So to bring it to the point, big data and artificial intelligence in the Anthropocene means advances in AI are needed to collect big data where and when it matters, to integrate isolated observations into broader studies and to create models. Intelligent systems need to incorporate extensive knowledge about the interdisciplinary field of data, the physical, the chemical, geological, biological, ecological, and anthropomorphic factors that influence Earth systems. So a new generation of knowledge-rich intelligent systems is coming up, which have the potential to significantly transform the geosciences research practices. Now, in the end, let me come to the announced roadmap for a sustainable Earth system. This picture should illustrate the Internet of Things spreading all over the planet Earth, like a brain. That means a monitoring system with their infrastructure, AI-based infrastructures on the right and the left, the keywords for the already existing examples for predictive analytics in the Earth system, smart cities, the so-called smart cities. I mentioned the complex urban systems, smart grids for optimizing energetic networks, and in the background concerning the societal influence, the big financial networks nowadays, which react to the climate change, and last but not least, the worldwide health system, which is actually now in a stress test after the corona crisis. So this is a suggestion for crucial questions concerning ethical, social, and a legal roadmap for a sustainable Earth system. First, concerning the ethical and legal norms for mobility infrastructure, smart cities, then the energy systems, and which ethical, legal, and social norms are necessary for the increasing automation of the labor world. And that needs a lot of energy, because digitalization is closely connected with energy supply. Which ethical and legal norms should be considered for application of intelligent infrastructures to support the violated and the violent Earth, which I mentioned in the beginning. In the end, I think the goals are given by the European constitutions in the different democratic countries, namely which ethical and legal norms are demanded for the dignity of humans, here the digital dignity of humans, with a lot of data which are necessary, for example, for the monitoring system, and a sustainable Earth system. This is my last folie. We need more explainability, accountability, and governance of these kind of dynamical systems and digital tools to master the increasing complexity of our Earth system. Now, I thank you for your attention, and that was thought as a kind of introduction, and I think we should start now with the first talk of Professor Mauser. Professor Mauser is, I will stop here my presentation. Okay. Professor Mauser is a member of our class 4 in the academy. That means the class of natural sciences. And he had the chance to, as far as I learned, he had the chance to cooperate with Paul Crutzen. And therefore, this talk is dedicated to the scientific legacy of Paul Crutzen. Please, it's your turn.
Thank you, Mr. Mainzer. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to now approach Paul Crutzen a little closer. And for this, I will share my few slides that I have. This is Paul, and I have the pleasure to talk about the scientific legacy of Paul Crutzen. From my point of view, this is a pretty personal point of view, and I think we should the whole legacy will emerge over time, and we should start doing this, and we should start foster this today, and within the realms of the European Academy of Science and Arts, because this is a special place where we have all the tools and all the people to do this. So we have come to get together on this day today to remember Paul Crutzen. At the same time, let us reflect on the legacy he left for us. Paul Crutzen passed away on January 28th, 2021. He was a Nobel Prize Laureate. He was a former director of the famous Max Planck Institute for Atmospheric Chemistry in Mainz. And he also was an honorable member of the European Academy of Science and Arts. On that day when he passed away, the international scientific community lost an outstanding scientific personality. And, which is also maybe even more important, a great friend of mankind. Paul, for decades, shaped in different fields of science the understanding of our contemporary world, which is characterized by eminently dynamic changes introduced by us, the currently living part of humankind. And we stand more and more that humankind is more than just the people who live today, but also the people who lived in the past, and much more importantly, the people who will live in the future and who will be influenced by our actions of today. His influence on the future development of this planet will continue far beyond his death. Paul's background was in chemistry, and I will now try to approach him a little closer. He understood in his early career that chemistry not only takes place in the laboratory. Chemistry is happening all around us and within us. It affects each of us, and through our increasing understanding of inorganic and organic chemistry, we acquired and are still acquiring a gigantic lever to use tiny molecules to influence large-scale, even global processes. It was his pioneering work in atmospheric chemistry induced by solar radiation, for which he finally received, together with his colleagues, the Nobel Prize in 1995. His findings paved the way to fully understand the substances and mechanisms involved in the ozone depletion in the upper atmosphere, which was observed particularly above the poles from the early 70s of the last century onward. Substances which did not exist in Earth's atmosphere before the 1950s and have never existed before, and which were specifically designed as cooling agents for the booming market of industrial and home refrigerators because of their variable and low boiling point and chemical inertia. Although they did not pose any direct health risk and were fit for purpose, they proved to be very active catalysts for the dissociation of ozone under the presence of ultraviolet light in the stratosphere of the Earth. Paul, not being an alarmist at all, was well aware of the meaning of his findings for the global environment and for life on Earth. An uncontrolled accumulation of chlorofluorocarbons and their relatives in the atmosphere would inevitably mean the destruction of the ozone layer and the loss of the protection of the planet from the solar ultraviolet radiation, which has the ability to destroy the genetic information of life. So this was alarming, and this was new as an experience, a scientific experience on the globe, that we have a lever by putting a few, very few molecules into the atmosphere, changing the radiative budget of the globe and changing the quality of radiation on the globe. Paul's finding, together with new satellite sensors in the last 70s and early 80s, and here I refer to my predecessor, Professor Mainzer, showing us the picture of big data. This was the first big data that big environmental data that we were confronted with. These images of an increasing and widening ozone hole in the 70s and 80s created, for the first time in human history, alarming pictures of a changing global atmosphere. This created public pressure and led to the Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ocean layer, the official name of the Montreal Protocol in 1987. Until to date, the Montreal Protocol is by far the most successful binding global environmental protection agreement. It is tremendously successful, which means that humankind has the perspective of reversing ozone depletion within the next 30 to 40 years. Developing the scientific basis and making it accessible to the global public and to decision makers was extremely valuable for mankind. It surely deserves a Nobel Prize. In the time between then and now, science and society relied on Paul's unassuming and eminently competent advice at many occasions when important questions were at stake. I personally first met Paul in the late 90s. At that time, there was a tense, in parts emotional discussion going on among atmospheric, climate, and environmental scientists around the globe on the cause of climate change, and specifically on the role of human activities. Are we the reason for the change in climate through our activities, industrial activities, emission of greenhouse gases? We were both sitting on the newly founded German National Committee for Global Change Research, which was founded by the German Research Association, DFG, and the German Ministry, together with the German Ministry for Education and Research, the BMBF, and regularly took a seat next to each other's during the meetings. There was a lot of exchange at that time, and even afterwards also, when he left the committee and I took over the chair. And we had a lot of exchange on these ideas and thoughts. And specifically when Klaus Hasselmann, who was one of the founding directors of the Max Planck Institute for Meteorology in Hamburg, around the turn of the century, surprised us as the scientific community with a very convincing smoking gun proof of humans being the dominant factor for the currently observed climate change. It was based on a very sophisticated fingerprinting technique. This changed the perception of many of us of the role of humankind in the Earth system and shifted the dominant concerns of environmental sciences from proof of human impact towards mitigation and adaptation to climate change. So that was the turning point of the whole climate change analysis and also the understanding of the Earth system and our role when Klaus Hasselmann presented us and the scientific community with his findings that left no way around for interpretation. Paul, as always, was listening carefully until one day we discovered, and he was not talking much about it, in the first newsletter of the new millennium, and I give you a copy of this now, here. It should move. Anyways, in the first newsletter of the new millennium of the International Geosphere Biosphere Program of ICSU, and he there published together with Eugene Sturmer a small thought piece entitled The Anthropocene. Here we go. So that was his first newsletter, and it was a very low key, very much specific to the IGBP research program, which was at that time one of the dominating international research programs studying the interaction of humans with the biosphere and the geosphere. And in this was this small article, just one page long, The Anthropocene. And Paul and Eugene wrote there, considering these and many other major and still growing impacts of human activities on Earth and atmosphere, and at all, including global scales, it seems to us more than appropriate to emphasize the central role of mankind in geology and ecology by proposing to use the term Anthropocene for the current geological epoch. And they followed, without major catastrophes, mankind will remain a major geological force for many millennia, maybe millions of years to come. To develop a worldwide accepted strategy leading to sustainability of ecosystems against human-induced stress will be one of the great future tasks of mankind, requiring intensive research efforts and wise applications of the knowledge thus acquired in the neurosphere, better known as knowledge and information society. An exciting but also difficult and daunting task lies ahead of the global research and engineering community to guide mankind towards global, sustainable environmental management. End of citation. At that time, those of us who read this and who were struggling hard to develop a positive perspective from the growing volume of alarming reports of symptoms of a serious illness of the Earth system received this visionary thoughts piece with interest and curiosity. It was not only giving an inventory of human impacts on the Earth system, it also expressed a revolutionary vision of research, engineering, and management of the whole global Earth system. Some of us were shocked. Some of us said, this is hybris. We cannot manage the global Earth system. Paul was, I think, one of the first people on the globe who actively formulated that there is no alternative. We have to, because we are living in the Anthropocene. At that time, those of us who, at that time, nevertheless, we did not expect that this should finally become Paul's most powerful legacy. In the last 20 years, though, his idea of the Anthropocene demonstrated how powerful it is. It spread widely beyond Paul's and Eugene's scientific disciplines. It thoroughly penetrates humanities, arts, and starts to enter economic and political decision-making. Over times, and with all these developments, Paul's genius was always paired with his characteristic humbleness and restraint. In private discussions and public talks, though, Paul could sure become emotional whenever he he pushed for the responsibility of the Anthropocene. He fiercely demanded increased respect for the ecosystems, the Earth system, and for the creation. He always fought for an unprejudiced, science-driven approach towards solutions, specifically when he some years later encouraged science and engineering, and also all scientific disciplines beyond, to investigate geoengineering as part of a solution, which was also as controversial as maybe the introduction of this term Anthropocene in the beginning. Fortunately, Paul Crutzen was granted with an apprehension of the power that his thoughts are unfolding in the scientific and social arena. With Paul Crutzen, we lose a great leading thinker of our century. Even more, we lose an inspiring, humorous, modest, and very pleasant-natured fellow human. So now, what is Paul Crutzen's scientific legacy? And again, I say this is my personal view of it. The first legacy, I think, is a global binding environmental protection agreement. The Montreal Protocol would not have been possible without the scientific basis that Paul laid. We need much more of that on our way to the Anthropocene. And we should orient at what happened before and during the negotiations of the Montreal Protocol, because we are in the process of understanding that only these global binding agreements can lead us out of the problems that we face in the Anthropocene. Secondly, it was Paul's unique and unprejudiced science-driven approach towards knowledge-based solutions, which allowed him to reach beyond the often tedious everyday routine of science and to formulate visions of the future. We need much more of this to successfully navigate the Anthropocene. And finally, I think it's the Anthropocene itself as Earth's current time period and situation. It will always be tightly connected with Paul Crutzen. His sharp analysis not only is a convincing example of human ability of self-reflection, even at times when this is not very advantageous for humankind. Obviously, the world was ripe for the Anthropocene and for the notion of responsibility it includes. Science and society should nourish and foster it in the framework, for example, of the European Academy of Science and Arts, of which Paul Crutzen was a member. Thank you for your attention.
Yep, thank you very much.
My contribution, this is what I had to say about Paul. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and very impressive to learn more about his Paul Crutzen's personality. And now we open the discussion. Are there any comments, questions, requests? But perhaps let me start the discussion. In some sense, it seems to me that was a success story. The success story with respect to interaction of science and politics. And I remember when the debate on the ozone hole came up. And nowadays, at least in that field, it seems to me we are on a much better way than years before. And that was, of course, initiated by a solid analysis of a natural scientist like Paul Crutzen on the one side, chemical and physical foundations. But on the other side, the politicians are more or less become more or less convinced that there is a problem we have to solve. And so what can we learn from Paul Crutzen? How should we arrange this kind of strategies between science and politics? Yeah. It's a question.
So I think maybe the most important thing was that Paul had this ability, and this is, I think, where we can learn a lot, to put what science was giving us results into terms that could be taken up by the public on the one side, but also by politicians, and that was surprising. It was a very low-key, not alarming way of putting things into perspective and saying, okay, you have the choice, but there is no way around these facts. And at the time, what was maybe helpful to him that there was no discussion about alternative facts, and facts were facts. Facts are still facts, but the way society is, or parts of society is treating facts is maybe a learning process that came from the 20 years or 30 years in between, where there is more and more awareness of global problems and problems that we only can solve together. But at the same time, politicians are learning that it is advantageous for them to look at their own advantages, to look into their strategies towards global solutions and try to come up best. And this makes it much more difficult to get solutions than at the time when the first of these agreements or protocols was put in place. And the second thing is, and I think that the stakes are much higher today than at the time when the Montreal Protocol was negotiated. There it was a small number of substances, industrial substances, that can be controlled quite easily and also be monitored quite easily. Now it's something that we are talking about, that is CO2, that we are all using, that we are all depending upon, which makes it much harder, I think. But the basic mechanisms that Paul has used to convince are still the same, and it has to be based on science that is clear and simply explained.
Mm-hmm. So it was not a way of his more or less charismatic personality in a communication strategy, but it was more or less the impression of facts. Is that
Yes.
right?
And his charisma was his seriousness.
His
seriousness.
Seriousness, yes. Okay. Further comments, questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, please.
It was mentioned by Wolfgang Maus already, the Montreal Protocol and now Rio, Kyoto, and Paris for the CO2 reduction. From a governmental perspective, why is Montreal working and all the others don't work? You know, you elaborated on that already, and we are facing this problem that everybody has the scientific evidence at hand and we know what we have to do, right? Like with the ozone layer, we also know what we have to do. There is no doubt about it. And at the same time, if you enter this debate on how to do it with regard to the CO2 reduction, the entire system is much more complex, and the stakeholders, especially within the financial system, are much more aversive to really buy into this. Can you further elaborate on that question about the increased complexity in coping with these Paris, Kyoto, Rio accords compared to the Montreal one? Thank you.
I can give it a try, and I can give you my opinion, and there may be some more opinions around the corner which contradict to what I say. I think the first and most important issue is that there is a question of scale between the chlorofluorocarbons and CO2, and the dependence of society on these different substances.
Yeah,
I mean, there is a comparable impact on the environment and on the atmosphere, but what is not comparable is the impact on the human societies. It is quite easy to say, okay, let's get rid of these fluorocarbons and try something different for cooling, but we have to change our whole energy system to get rid of CO2, and this is what we do now. Second, I think within the course of the last 20 years, there have been considerable investments either in staying the way it is, put into staying the way it is, or put into changing it. So I had the pleasure, together with Martin Grumbo, to be visiting the Paris negotiation in 2015, and where this accord was reached, and it was very clear even beforehand this pivotal impact that Germany had on the whole energy system discussion by introducing this electricity law, where everybody can inject electricity into the net.
Yeah, the EEG. Yeah,
EEG, right, which has been copied by 25 countries now.
Yeah.
And it was a 100 billion investment by Germany, and the result was that the prices for the renewables went down drastically and fast, much faster than there was thought in the beginning by the green and red chancellorship during Schröder. They thought it would be equal to the coal by the year 2035, and now we are in 2015 had the pretty clear indicators that we are almost reaching that point. And now we have reached it. So there was a lot of investment by Germany into that, and actually Germany was trying to negotiate in Paris to get something of that, some of this money back, 100 billion. Now everybody else said, nice try. You did it, but nevertheless, it was a good idea to do it, and it was a bad idea then afterwards to shift all these technology into China. But this is now something that has a much larger scale than what Paul was confronted with when it was about ozone. But the mechanisms are still should still be the same. And finally, it was a miracle, and everybody said it was a miracle that in Montreal the countries agreed on a binding protocol. But it is possible, and it told us that this is possible, and it is. I still think it's possible to repeat this. But there is much more at stake. This is what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
I hope that was a bit of an answer to your question.
I mean, what from the problem, what I see when we discuss it with the UN now and with the World Bank is that over the last UN publication a couple of weeks ago showed that Kyoto, Rio, and Paris, with regard to CO2, did not cause any significant change if there was no protocol. It was just a meeting, it was just a talk. And if you look at the data, at the facts, that Paul Crutzen always been focusing on is we subsidize globally and fund globally fossil industry by a factor 2 or 3 higher than renewables still. So they're both sterilizing each other. So it's not going to work this way. It's really not going to work. Okay. Okay. Anyway.
Yeah. No, I agree with you.
Okay. Further question.
Yeah, one remark.
Okay.
Side,
Grumbo.
Thanks to being this very, very dedicated group, and 2 remarks. One is about Paul Crutzen. He was one of these, let me say, scientific heroes who were able to understand things and explain them very, very simply. They understood complex things and explained them very, very simple, and gave them a name or an idea. And by the way, I think some of the honorable persons here listening to us are from this kind of people. So I'm happy to be with you in discussion. And the second thing about Montreal, it was a very smart question. I think Stefan Brunhuber is a psychologist and should explain why things are happening like that. But I think Montreal was something like simple, because it was about one group of stuffs let me say refrigerators, and this was something we could solve more easily than this complicated question of energy, who is touching much more fields. And I say, let's see and wait. We are on that issue, and it needs some time, but it's not the thing like Stefan told us that the other protocols were failing or nothing happened. Yes, it happened something, but we need a little bit more time. So this comment from my side.
Okay, Martin, just give me a feedback on that, because you mentioned me again. What I want to say, the single most important factor to make Kyoto, Rio, and Paris a success, I think, are going to lay in the financial sector itself. It's not technology to begin with. Okay, so we have to upgrade and reshape the monetary and financial system. And we've been trying to advocate for that within the European Academy since several years, and I'm spearheading a working group in this field. And without addressing the financial sector, this is not going to happen. Okay, anyway.
Now, on this line, I have a further question or remark. What about the influence of groups of lobbyists in that time of Paul Crutzen? I'm also a member in another academy, the German National Academy of Technology. And there I had the chance in the last month to observe the discussion between industry and the different groups of lobbyists concerning the so-called, the German word Lieferkettengesetz, the law of supply chain. And that was a hard struggle. When I heard read the newspapers and heard the news in the TV and so on, you cannot imagine how hard and sometimes hostile the struggle was hidden behind the public. And so my question again, what about the influence of groups of industry, political groups of different colors in the time of Paul Crutzen? Was it harder or less hard? And what is your impression, Wolfram Mauser?
I had the same thoughts, and I can remember that I asked Paul, how hard was it at that time to get this Kyoto Protocol through? And this doesn't give any scale whether it was harder than today or it was not as hard as today. I couldn't even tell that. But one answer struck me. One part of the answer struck me. He said, "Well, this is a chemistry. It was the chemical industry that was involved, the global chemical industry that was involved, and I'm a chemist. So for them, it was probably harder to fight against me than anybody else, whether it would have been a physicist or would have been an environmentalist or whoever. I was one of them, and for me, it was remarkable that he stayed one of them. he turned into a part of chemistry, which was not the mainstream chemistry at that time. And even today, it's not the mainstream chemistry, atmospheric chemistry. And he managed to stay a renowned chemist and finally got the Nobel Prize against many other candidates for a part of chemistry, which is not mainstream chemistry, and which is an outside border part of chemistry. I never really understood how he managed to stay respected with these interest groups, but that was his answer to it.
Yes. So,
and I found it was an interesting answer. I found it was an answer that showed deeply to me that even these people who have no or not much doubts about how to act against other people, as long as it's in their interest, have some kind of respect or fighting control when somebody of their kind is involved.
Okay, so what we can learn here, Nobel Prize may be helpful.
I'm sure it's helpful.
Yes. Okay, we are now in time, and 2 o'clock, we should start with our next talk. That is Professor Ernst Ulrich von Weizsäcker.
Dear friends of the European Academy of Science and Art, it's a particular privilege for me giving a talk about my old friend Paul Crutzen, about Anthropocene and climate crisis. The state of the planet is broken, says the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres. He also says that other than with COVID-19, there is no vaccination available, and we experience a relentless increase of global warming. The former World Bank economist, Herman Daly, who is also professor now emeritus in America, proposes to distinguish the empty world from the full world. The empty world was earlier times, and the full world is now. And the empty world was sustainable, and the full world is not. It's hardly sustainable. At a meeting in 2000 of the Scientific Committee of the IGBP, the International Geosphere-Biosphere Program, happening in Cuernavaca in Mexico, scientists were talking about the Holocene, the very benign geological epoch of the past 11,000 years after the last ice age. They described the massive changes occurring on Earth since a couple of decades and centuries, meaning during the full world. Paul Crutzen sat in the room listening, but with increasing exasperation. And suddenly he raised his voice and said, "We are no longer in the benign Holocene, but in," and then he didn't know what to say, and said, "in the Anthropocene." So he sort of, in talking, invented the term. Later, Paul Crutzen learned that Eugene Sturmer, a freshwater biologist in America, had used the term Anthropocene some years earlier, although with a somewhat different, much narrower meaning. Crutzen invited Sturmer to co-publish the term and the concept. And that was the beginning of a most fabulous linguistic career of the term Anthropocene almost immediately. And the IGBP community quickly adopted the term as a central framing concept for much of their work. This story I was learning from a very, very kind obituary note praising Paul Crutzen after his death by Jan Zalasiewicz, Colin Wouters, and Will Steffen from Australia. The full world is now called the Anthropocene, and it saw 70 years, essentially since 1950, of explosive acceleration. This picture is a colored version of a paper published by Will Steffens, the professor whom I just mentioned, Paul Crutzen, and John McNeill. You may see a thin vertical line on each of these small pictures. This is the year 1950, meaning that after 1950, the explosion began with world population, world GDP, etc., etc. And then the green pictures show the suffering of nature. The higher the curve, the more disastrous for the environment. And the core fact of the full world is world population increase. Since 1950, we had roughly a tripling of world population, and also a 20-fold increase of human consumption. The United Nations Fund for Population Activities in 2015 published a paper called Consequential Omissions, in which they show that areas of the world with high population increase were the economic losers, and those capable of stabilizing the world their population, in particular East Asia, were the big winners. One measure of the Anthropocene is particularly alarming. It's the body weights of land-living vertebrates. And it was calculated that roughly 2/3 of the body weights is essentially animals for slaughter by humans, and 30% humans, leaving a mere 3% of the global body weights of wild animals, 3%. That's an indication that our present Anthropocene situation is totally unsustainable. The current trends in the full world are in no way sustainable. Most alarming, evidently, is global warming and the biodiversity collapse. Back to climate policy. In Sweden in 2018, we saw 28 large wildfires. And these Swedish shocks triggered and boosted Greta Thunberg's huge resonance. A schoolgirl of 50 years sat before the Reichstag and protested and said, we have to go in strike. Most of the global heating that we are currently experiencing is on land. I mean, wildfires and all that stuff. But the real heating occurs in the oceans. The blue part shows the ocean heating, and the red part is land and atmosphere heating, meaning that the real scare may soon be the rise of the seawater table. Look for an illustration at this. Italy, during the last ice age, was a lot larger, and the Adriatic Sea was much smaller. And during the last hot age, roughly 2 million years ago, Italy was only half the size. And imagine what that means for places like London, Stockholm, Athens, or Florida, or Bangladesh for that matter. Some 1.3 billion people, of them 0.8 billion in Asia alone, live directly at the ocean coasts. The red dots mean cities of more than 1 million people, and some of them evidently like Shanghai or Mumbai or so, more than 10 million people. So imagine the seawater table rising by something like 5 meters, and we would have 200 million additional refugees. Of course, we at the Club of Rome, and anyway, people were happy about the Paris Climate Agreement. But how do countries respond to it? The typical first reaction worldwide is, well, yes, okay, let's do something on climate, but it's going to be very expensive. So we need a lot more economic growth. Is that the right answer? I suggest it's not. It's a mad answer. I mean, here on these small pictures, we see the most important 8 economic sectors in which, from left to right, we plot the per capita GDP, and from bottom to top, we plot the carbon dioxide emissions per person. And they go absolutely hand in hand in each of the 8 sectors, meaning that if we just do more economic growth, we will automatically have more carbon dioxide emissions. In other words, we are reasonably good doctors in the meantime for diagnosis. We know that global warming is a toxic disease, but we are totally mad doctors for recovery. We systematically suggest treatments that make the disease worse. Would you go to such doctors if you are ill? Well, one of the problems is we people. People seem to prefer reassuring lies over the inconvenient truth. This picture was made by the cartoonist after Al Gore in America, then vice president, had published his book, An Inconvenient Truth, and made a film out of that, An Inconvenient Truth. And the cartoonist imagined a cinema in which the inconvenient truth is shown and a reassuring lie. And where are people going? They love the reassuring lies. I mean, Donald Trump knew that very well. While we sit here comfortably, some 600 new coal power plants are under construction or planned worldwide, and evidently 90% of them in developing countries. We shouldn't blame them for that, because we have shown them how Europe got rich. But an effective climate policy must include the developing countries. In the current negotiations at the conferences of the parties of the Climate Convention, typically the developing countries say, well, stopping global warming is your task, not ours. We have to grow. And if we don't include the developing countries, we are losing the war. I believe the best and most promising strategy is the so-called budget approach, in which it was said that all countries will receive identical per capita permits for using the atmosphere, meaning emitting greenhouse gases. But the old industrialized countries, that's the red lines, have almost already exhausted their carbon budget and would then have to go shopping to developing countries, the green lines, for new permits. That would mean all of a sudden, overnight, the developing countries would become richer by entering the game of reducing and stopping global warming. Today, the opposite is true. They get richer by doing the wrong thing. And if we do that, the budget approach, then the Indian economy minister, one of the most aggressive friends of new coal power plants, would soon switch from promoting coal power to renewables and energy efficiency, while selling the thereby freed respective permits to the north. Now, we have roughly 3 different options for the decarbonization. 30% is just less carbon dioxide in energy. That's what everybody knows, and it's a standard recipe. But I believe less energy in well-being is the larger and most important option. But nobody can believe that. And then less consumption. Well, that's extremely unpopular. So I know no government in the world that is seriously proposing that as the main answer to the global warming problems. For the Club of Rome, I had the privilege of writing a book, Factor 5, together with an Australian team under Charlie Hargroves, who is now also a member of the Club of Rome, in which we demonstrate that for the 4 most important, most relevant sectors of the economy, a 5-fold increase of energy productivity and also raw materials productivity is available. And that would allow us to completely stop fossil fuel burning and, of course, nuclear power as well. Factor 5 shows, technically, the Australians did most of that, it's feasible. Then there are, of course, 2 more options: stabilize and later reduce human world population, very important, and a new point, geoengineering. Here again, Paul Crutzen comes in. He proposed officially to have aerosols boosted into the stratosphere in order to shield away heating sunlight. And then there are many other options. I had the privilege in Santa Barbara, California, where I was serving as the dean of the Californian School of Environmental Science and Management, to invite Paul Crutzen, who typically had his winter months in San Diego, California. And he was generous enough accepting the invitation. And we had a wonderful chance of speaking with each other about all the necessary political stops for curbing global warming. And he explained to me that he had proposed the geoengineering option in order to shock the public so that they would learn there are much more benign options available than geoengineering. And aside, he greatly encouraged me to pursue the Factor 5 strategy, which was in the writing at the time, which he found more thrilling than decarbonizing the use of energy. Let me at the end offer some thoughts by the Club of Rome. We published a major new report called Come On. I mean, come on has 2 different meanings in the English language, consisting of 3 parts. Part 1, come on, don't tell me the current trends are sustainable. They are not. Part 2, come on, don't stick to outdated philosophies. And part 3, come on, join us on an exciting journey towards a sustainable world. Part 2 says that our civilizations are in a deep philosophical crisis. And we find almost exactly the same concern in Pope Francis' fabulous encyclical Laudato Si, where he declares that the current philosophy of greed, relentless competition, and wild acceleration is destroying our common home. Responding to the philosophical crisis, we suggest to engage in a new enlightenment. A year and a half ago, I had the privilege of addressing the first All-European Fridays for Future meeting that was in Lausanne, Switzerland, meeting there with Greta Thunberg. And we also chatted about the new philosophy, a philosophy amenable for the young and for the next generation, for the future. But coming back to Command for a moment, we must realize that we have no time to wait for philosophical results of the new enlightenment. We also have to act now. And that is part 3 of the book, as I said, come on and join us, etc. And that is also about policy change. We need absolutely massive changes in agriculture, energy, transport, circular economy, financial markets, they have to be controlled, and tax systems, making the climate-friendly operations more profitable than the climate-destroying operations, which is the case now. This is the end of my homage to my deceased friend, Paul Crutzen. Thank you very much.
Perhaps we can start a discussion here. And your voice from the train seems to be very clear to me. And so perhaps it is possible to discuss about your main points. Would it be possible for you to to announce us your main points very shortly?
Well, essentially, Paul Crutzen did a great thing, actually including the Montreal Protocol, which was mentioned, that also helped reduce the climate impact of the chlorofluorocarbons. That was fantastic. In addition, we say that the Anthropocene is an extremely dangerous period for the planet, and that solar energy will not be enough. We need also an efficiency revolution. And in a book which I published together with an Australian team, we seem to prove that a 5-fold increase of energy productivity is technically possible, so that we don't need that much energy, as everybody seems to believe. So essentially, that's the message.
Mm-hmm. I think it was very interesting for me that your own biography is at some points connected with Paul Crutzen. Perhaps you can explain us a little bit more details about your experiences with Paul Crutzen.
Well, when I was Dean of the School of Environmental Science and Management at the University of California, Santa Barbara, I had the pleasure of inviting him, and he gave a talk about the Anthropocene and indeed about geoengineering. And I had a wonderful discussion with him for an hour or two.
Excuse me, sir. You talk as loudly as the shuttle. Can you imagine as loud as
we can understand you,
Sorry,
nevertheless.
Because people, and I'm very, very sorry.
We can understand you. It's only in the background.
No, I think the problem is that the other guests in the train are claiming for quiet. This is a problem, and I think thank you very much, Ernst, for telling us the story so far, and I think we recorded this meeting so we can put the original of your speech into the film. I hope this is a technical solution that in the future we can look to your presentation. Thank you very much.
Yes, but nevertheless, we can a little bit discuss, because we have time, about his main point. Namely, we know his thesis from a former discussion, namely the importance of the energy question. I think that is his crucial message. And how should we do that? And he mentioned, for example, the tax systems. And that means, as far as I learned from him, he is on the side of the state to underline the role of the state to influence and to govern the energy question by the influence and governance of the state, for example, by tax systems. What do you think about that?
I also mentioned that Franz Timmermans, who is the deputy of Ursula von der Leyen in Brussels, says that only 55% of the homework regarding climate is energy, and 45% is stuff, materials, which people don't know. People believe it's 95% energy and the rest is negligible. That's wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That means you do not believe in the argument which we hear sometimes from the side of industry, that we should more rely in the responsibility, it is called, the responsibility of the different groups and participants in this discussion. We need norms and strict rules by the state in order to manage the energy problem for the future. Is that your position?
Basically, yes, but not too much administration.
Mm-hmm.
The price policy is, I believe, essential.
Mm-hmm.
If energy is cheap, people will waste it.
Okay. Are there further comments? Yeah, Wolfgang Mauser.
Yeah, maybe one thing that is really bothering me, and that is something I think about, and this is the public discussion about sacrifice, because I see more and more that there is this issue of conflict building up, of efficiency that is only possible with sacrifice, and sacrifice is something that people don't want to do. And Mr. Mainzer, you mentioned the responsibility issue, and the responsibility issue is then connected to the sacrifice issue, and all of a sudden it gets unpopular in the public discussion. So, Mr. Weizsäcker, what do you think about this this question of efficiency versus sacrifice, and is sacrifice necessary? Or how do we deal with sacrifice and also of the picture that is painted about sacrifice?
That's a very good question. And my answer is that the better we work on efficiency, the less sacrifice will be needed.
Okay, that's very clear. I like this answer because I mean, it is a technology answer, but it's also an answer that there is limited change necessary, that we can probably manage the change that is necessary.
Yeah, let me give one example, which I always ask my students. I ask them the following thing. Imagine a weight, a rucksack or something of 10 kilograms. And please calculate for me how many kilowatt hours you would need to lift that weight from sea level to the top of Mount Everest. And when I was asking this question in California, the typical answer was 1,000 or 10,000 kilowatt hours. When I'm asking the same question in Germany, it's only between 100 and 1,000. Both is totally wrong. The physical answer is 1/4 of a kilowatt hour, meaning a kilowatt hour is an unbelievable powerhouse, but we waste it no end because it doesn't cost a thing.
Okay, I think that was a nice picture, and we can think about that because now having a look to our program, we have a short coffee break.
Mr. Vogt would like to say something, sorry.
Yeah.
Markus Vogt would like to say something.
Okay.
May I add a question quite similar to that one of Wolfram? Do you like the idea of the double decoupling? That means we need a revolution in efficiency, but at the same time, a revolution in values for a new direction of understanding of welfare, to have welfare with less things. And they think that double decoupling in efficiency, in technology, and also in culture is necessary. And only if we have both things and both dimensions in mind, we can be successful, because the experience of the last decades was that we were very clever in more efficiency, but we needed that for more needs in our understanding of welfare.
Yes, of course. That I hope that will be the general message of our conference in the end, because efficiency of technology, especially concerning energy, that is also a main goal, for example, in China. But the difference will be the different ethical value systems in the background of both cultures. And so what we call in German Technikgestaltung, that means shaping technology, governance of technology to different aims, that will be the challenge. But I think this more general message was made very clear with a nice example of the rucksack of Ernst Ulrich von Weizsäcker. And so I think we have now a chance to think about this example much more for our short coffee break. And we will start again at 3 o'clock. And in the afternoon session, we will hear 3 contributions, not the energy, not the climate problem in general with respect to Paul Crutzen, but from different points of view, namely economy, politics, and ethics. And then we will come back to your question again, combining these both aspects. Okay. In our first part, that was a general overview on the climate change with special respect to the merits of Paul Crutzen. And now in the second part, We will consider the climate change from 3 points of view, namely societal impact, namely economics, politics, and ethics, corresponding to different classes in our academy. And we will start with challenges of circular economy by Michael von Hauff, who is a member of class 5. That is our big class in the academy, which includes law as well as economics and social sciences, and he is a well-known economist. We are eager to learn from you more about circular economy. Professor von Hauff, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you to my presentation about challenges of circular economy. I start with a short introduction and come then to the origin of the circular economy, the historical view. In chapter 3, I speak about the circular economy as a key of the implementation of sustainable development. In my chapter 4, I want to give a vision from circular economy to circular society. And last but not least, the question, where do we stand today? I think the whole process began in 1992 at the Rio de Janeiro conference. Big companies or multinational companies started with eco-efficiency as their contribution to sustainable development. Eco-efficiency means to reduce energy and resources while increasing economic efficiency. If we can reduce energy and resources in a company, in a single company, then it means that you will increase the economic efficiency or the economic profit. But it is a selective reduction in every single company. So we call it also microeconomic approach. After that, there was a further development in the direction to eco-effectiveness. I think eco-effectiveness is a theoretical background of circular economy. It's a much broader concept, eco-effectiveness, and it's focused on cycles. So therefore, this is the basis for the concept of the circular economy. The circular economy originally comes from agriculture. The goal was the fertility of agricultural land should be preserved. And therefore, organic waste from the household, from the cattle shed, or the waste of agricultural products were brought back to the field. I think this was the beginning of the circular economy. So circular economy is a very old concept. What is now the difference between the mainstream economy and circular economy? Mainstream economy is the linear or disposable economy is still globally dominated today, especially in industrialized countries, but more and more also in developing countries. What happens to raw materials after goods have been used? They are either burned, deposited, or recycled. In 2015, Haas and colleagues wrote a book, and they showed that while globally roughly 4 gigatons per year of waste materials are recycled, and 41 gigabytes materials are the whole amount of waste. So if you compare the 4 gigatons and 41 gigatons, you can see that about 10% only of the waste materials are recycled. The potentials have been recognized in Germany and EU. So in German words, we started in 1994 with the so-called Kreislaufwirtschafts- und Abfallgesetz. And in December 2015, the EU Commission adopted the circular economy package with 50 measures. This is until now on the paper, and we will see how they realize this circular economy package, or they implement the circular economy package with the 50 measures. Now, the circular economy goes back to the economist David Pearce. David Pearce and Carrie Turner wrote a book with the title Economics of Natural Resources and the Environment. And in chapter 2 in this book, they described the circular economy. So what is the goal of circular economy? If you make it very simple, you can say circular economy is a system on the basis of planetary boundaries. They must not be exceeded. That's very important for the circular economy. The aim is to reduce resources, waste, emissions, and energy consumption in 2 steps. Step 1 is slow down, and step 2, develop and implement energy and material cycles. So I think it's very important. You can see that circular economy is a long process. We can't realize it overnight. It's a very long process. What is to do? These are only a few examples. Durable or sustainable construction, maintenance and repairability, and remanufacturing and recycling. What is a prerequisite? Products must be constructed and designed. This is very important, that the design is in the right way, in such a way that they can be reused and repaired at low cost, financially and in terms of energy. What is the conclusion? In this way, the stock of natural resources can be preserved, and emissions that are harmful to nature, to health, but also to climate change can be minimized. However, circular economy is not only a macroeconomic model or macroeconomic concept. Also, at least big companies, but also sometimes medium-sized companies can introduce innovative cycles. And the second area are industrial zones. We had some projects in this field that we discussed with managers in industrial zones. What are the possibilities by introducing a common energy or logistics concept? And there are in Germany at least some industrial zones where they started with such projects. What I said, circular economy is a process driven by innovations. This requires new production and recycling facilities. And here, colleagues of mine in the Technical University of Kaiserslautern said to me, research is needed to promote this process. Therefore, the government has to promote this research activities. I give you one very good example. I think then it becomes very clear. In 2008, 1.3 billion mobile phones were sold. Due to inadequate recycling methods, 31 tons of gold, 235 tons of silver, 12 tons of palladium and 4,900 tons of cobalt were lost. Now I come to some economic relevant effects. Let me start with the employment effects of circular economy. If you look to the literature, you can find that until now it cannot be clearly clarified theoretically. We have some empirical studies, and I give you one example from one study. Companies that introduced circular economy innovations between 2012 and 2016 had better employment and turnover effects in comparison to other companies without this circular economy innovations. Limits and perspectives of circular economy. I start with two, I think, well-known effects. This is Javen's paradox. And that means technical progress leads to more efficient use of raw materials. If you can use raw materials more efficient, you can increase the costs. And that means the consequence, it leads to a greater demand of raw materials because cheaper products have a high demand or increasing demand, and that means you have to produce more goods and you need more raw materials. Quite similar is a rebound effect, and I give you here one well-known example. New generations of cars reduce fuel consumption, but at the same time, more kilometers driven compensate or overcompensate this reduction. And at the end, I have a question, and I can't really answer because we have a big controversy about that. Is there a myth of decoupling resource consumption and growth through technological progress? I think technological progress is not enough to decoupling resource consumption and growth. You need many other things. We speak more and more about social innovations. We need more social innovations in this context. Positive examples. There are first implementations in the field of cradle to cradle, and there are two examples. One, successful example, and second example is very successful, I would say. 86% of construction waste is recycled. What is the problem? The recycled materials do not have the same quality of the original product, and therefore the recycled materials can be used mostly for street constructions. Example two, we have a small company nearby Stuttgart, and they produce mainly t-shirts. And they found out that t-shirts made from organic cotton can be composted after use, and it works. However, there is still a great potential. I'll give you only two examples for the big potential we have in the field of circular economy. Only part of plastic is recycled today. The recycling rate is about 36%. And there are many other alternatives to plastic products today. But on the other hand, we have a big plastic industry in Germany with quite a lot of jobs. And therefore, this plastic industry is not very much interested in alternatives to plastic products. This is something we discuss under the thing of lobbyism. There was a report in 2015 which states only 35% of e-waste in the EU goes into the official recycling channels. So 65 was exported mostly illegally. And I have seen it in, for example, in African countries, but mostly in Asian countries, that you have many children sitting on the ground and recycle this e-waste. And you all know it's very unhealthy for these children. Summary of some problems. Cradle-to-cradle design is often still lacking. There's also a big need for research. Recycling methods or recycling technologies need to be further developed, and there's also a big need for research. The energy costs of recycling are sometimes too high, or the market prices achieved for recycled materials are in some cases too low. These are some of the problems. Now I come to my vision, from circular economy to circular society. Circular society expands the ecologically, economically oriented circular economy to include the social dimension. You know, social dimension is one very important part for sustainable development. This involves, for example, participation, social justice, gender equality, and quality of life. And the question is here, do we have problems here in our society with participation, social justice, and so on? Circular economy is therefore only one, of course, very important part of sustainable development. But again, in addition to the biosphere and technosphere, there's also the social sphere, which should be included. And then we come to the vision from circular economy to circular society. Where do we stand? Circular economy does not fall from the heaven, no doubt about that. Are there incentives come from the market? We need more research, and products should be more designed for a circular economy. And I think the government should promote the whole process much more. But for the German government of Germany and the EU, the circular economy is in the context of sustainable development of great importance. Again, in any case on the paper, let's see what happens in the next few years. One problem from the perspective of the companies, German companies often find themselves between transformation on the one hand and economic optimization. Circular economy in the context of the 2030 agenda, we can say experts expect that the circular economy can enable global GDP growth of US $4.5 trillion. But again, only if the circular economy is promoted by all the governments and also research institutes. Perspective, some economists consider circular economy as a new economic system. Also, industrialized countries are on the way to a circular economy. How far have they come so far? Industrialized countries are committed to support developing countries on the path to a circular economy. What has been done so far? I know it from Vietnam and India. There are some projects, but if you look to these two countries, at least to the two countries, then we will find out that these countries are very much on the beginning of on the path to a circular economy. Now I'm at the end of my presentation, and I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Michael von Hau, for this clear presentation with clear recommendations and requests, I think. And you already mentioned there are a lot of activities now in that field. At the Technical University, Munich, Peter Wilderer is involved. There are two. We have a so-called DALEM conference, which will also be connected with a presentation with the European Academy of Science and Arts in some weeks on circular economy, and the National German Society of Science and Technology also have a great project with people from industry and science technology on circular economy. The idea brings us back what I called complex systems in the beginning. Perhaps you remember my picture with these different factors and points which are connected with arrows and feedback loops. The idea circular economy is mainly to recombine these arrows in a way that the whole system is producing not only in an efficient but in a sustainable way. Yeah. And the question, of course, is how can we do that? And I hope and I think you will have a lot of questions from your point of view concerning this question. Yeah, Markus Vogt.
Yeah, so thank you very much for the interesting presentation. My question is, what do you think about bioeconomy? Is bioeconomy the same as circular economy? Is it a part, or is circular economy a part of bioeconomy? Because in the moment, bioeconomy is pushed. We have the year of science of bioeconomy this year, and last year we have an advisory board for bioeconomy on the Bavarian level. There I'm member, on the national member of the European member. And my special interest is the concept of bioeconomy is ethically quite diverse discussed, because bioeconomy was on the European level combined with the idea of green growth. And some say that is greenwashing, and others say bioeconomy is very interesting because it's something like the innovative side of sustainability. And so I think it's very interesting, the relationship between bioeconomy and circular economy.
I think, Markus, we have the same problem with circular economy. There's not really one definition or one very clear concept. There's a lot under the cover of circular economy as well under the cover of bioeconomy. And I'm not so much informed about bioeconomy, but I know some projects where I would say these are projects on the way to sustainable development. But I also know, like you mentioned, also quite a lot of projects or activities I never would accept that this is really a very important part for sustainable development. But maybe there are other colleagues in the round who are much more informed, for example, Wolfram?
Well, yeah, yes and no. In a way, I think it is, we are recognizing many words for many things, and it is I mean the way we are dealing words is not sustainable, because we are inventing words and then we're throwing them away. The bioeconomy is very old. If you brew beer, what you do is bioeconomy. So what's new about it in a way? I never really understood what is new about it. It's charging up a word with a meaning that is, in my opinion, not existing. As long as you don't say what is specific about bioeconomy and there is nothing sustainable about bioeconomy by itself. Making money out of biology.
I'm personally a little bit cautious with this kind of terminology like bioeconomy, because for me it seems only to be a metaphor of nature, but actually societies and human economy is working in a different way. Maybe that there are some analogies with an natural, ecological, and biological system, but in the end, these socio-technical and societal economic systems are quite different. And so I would be cautious to call it a bio. I prefer a circular economy. Of course, circular economy is also a simplification, because it is not only one circle in the sense of recycling. It is actually a very complex network. And in the end, I think, and that seems to be supported by all of these working groups, is the idea of sustainable economy. Economy in the long run must be sustainable. What we call in German Umweltbilanz. That means the whole balance must be considered with the different factors: societal impact and economic impact, the industries, and of course ecological aspects and societal legal aspects whatsoever. And so I'm cautious with bio.
May I just add? I think I share this critical perspective. And I think the interesting question is, what shall we do? Shall we try to add a critical perspective on the term of the use of language? And which this is very important, and bioeconomy is in the political area the semantic winner. Yeah. And it is used and quite often misused. And so I think my part as a philosopher is to look on the misuse of language. And exactly. I think there I have a lot of to do in the context of this using bioeconomy. And there is a lot of money connected with the term and the programs of bioeconomy. And so I think it's worth to have there a critical point of view.
Yeah. Of course, as scientists and specialists in a field, you can say, "Oh, I'm a nominalist, and terminology is not important for me. Interesting is only what we are actually doing." But I think we should be, in your sense, critical to the words, because words are more or less unconsciously influence our mind. And that means in the end, the public and the politics. Yes, of course. That is your role as a philosopher and theologian. You should be critical with words. Yes. Wolfgang Mauser. Yeah.
I would like to raise an example, which I've been thinking about lately, because I had a presentation on the food for the next generation. Bioeconomy. If you look at all the animal raising that is done around the globe, with these billions of animals that we raise for our meat demand, we could call this bioeconomy, because we are taking biological systems and produce something out of it that has economic value and that is traded. So nothing new about this. If we think that we change the globe until 2050 into 90% cultured meat, that has a fraction of today's need of non-meat food, to be produced. So we could change the footprint drastically by doing this. Is this also bioeconomy? Or is this economy that is in bioreactors, which are not bioreactors, these are factories, and producing meat out of cells, cell cultures? I would rather prefer to find a new word for this and separate the natural process of animals who grow and die from something that is maybe much more intelligent for us to use as food, but then is industrial and can be brought into a circular economy process that maybe is contributing strongly to a future more sustainable world. I don't have an opinion on that at the moment, but I think all this is confusing because everything is in this big pot of bioeconomy.
But I think the main idea behind circular economy is, and that was underlined by Michael von Hauff, that is the idea that in the end we should reconstruct the supply chain and in order to get a more innovative, but on the same side, a more innovative and sustainable economy. That is, I think, the idea behind that. And bio only, I think that is a correct sense if you only consider the connection with food, for example, and that is clearly bioeconomy in the sense that it considers the production in that biological field, things like that.
No, but the problem to me seems to be with the recycling idea. Can you recycle life? Can you recycle the life of an animal? You can recycle the molecules, you can recycle whatever, but can you, how does that fit into circular economy?
Yeah. That bioeconomy perhaps could mean now it is very, very exciting with respect to the welfare of animals. Can you reconstruct food, not only animals, but reconstruct food?
Yeah.
And so more and more people, there is a change of estimation in the public like to do that, and there is a change in that field. So that is also an exciting idea. But on the other side, circular economy is more than that. That is only a special field. I think circular economy is in the end to reconstruct and reorganize economy in the sense of a sustainable economy with new innovation, not only with restriction of tax and sacrifices and things like that, but in order a new innovative economy. That's the vision, at least, behind that. Okay, that's very exciting. By the way, I can invite you on the 11th of June. That is Friday in 2 weeks. We will have the conference at TUM on circular economy in connection with our academy. Our academy is also a co-organizer of this event. If you are interested, you can take part, and then the results of this research group, which were organized in the sense of a Dahlem conference, is presented. Now, following strictly our program, we have now, thank you very much again for the presentation and the discussion. And we will have our next contribution by Martin Grumbo. He is professor at TUM, but also, that is perhaps more important now for the presentation, he is an important representative of the environmental ministry in Bavaria, and he will consider the political impact of our topic today, challenges of environmental politics. Martin Grumbo.
Yeah, dear President, everybody can hear me. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy that Jane Cork and Agnes Limmer are with us. Otherwise, we would only be some men. And Jane Cork, by the way, helped me very much to understand the Anthropocene. And this actually is the point I'm talking about today. How Paul Crutzen helped us to understand our business. And I will show you this with the help of some slides. Please tell me if you can.
You must share it.
Yeah. I'm.
It's the green light.
Ja. Die
Bildschirm freigeben.
Ich weiß, das Problem ist, dass dann meine. Give me a moment, please give me a moment. I try it like this. So.
Looks good.
It's
good.
Is it working now?
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. I'm doing this with the example of the water frame directive. So I think everybody of you knows the water frame directive. It is a policy approach to stabilize the water system of all European rivers and lakes and the groundwater, so the whole water sector. And the idea of the Commission was a political revolution, because they formulated a philosophical valued task, and this task was named the good status. We can speak long about what is good, but this I think was a ethical approach to say we want to have all our rivers and lakes exactly in the year of 2022 in the so-called good status, which is something like a stabilized ecosystem. So something is this way. Okay. And meanwhile, after some 20 years of working with this water frame directive, we found out that it is very hard to get this good status. We're investing a lot, and on this picture you see, don't worry about the different colors. The important color always is the green one. So in 2009, we had only 21 of the German, or in this case, Bavarian, but you can take this picture for whole Europe, yeah? So in Bavaria, we had only 21% of the rivers after 10 years, more or less, in the good shape. And in 2015, it decreased. So we had less rivers in the good shape. So the situation was worse than in the beginning. And actually, we got some back. So we have 19% in the so-called good shape. So no way to bring all rivers, all groundwater, the European water shape in a good shape status in 2027. And easily it was spoken about in the policy dialogue. So we did not enough, and there's not enough efforts to get this. So that's easy. And at the end, the reason is with us. So we didn't do our homework. But what happened really? when you go back to the papers of the European Commission around the 1990s, when the Water Frame Directive was born, they calculated for whole Euro to get this Europe to get this aim about 500 million EQ. Okay, it was half of the member states in this time, but they calculated about half a billion, so 600 million EQ for whole Europe. And in Bavaria alone, we invested until now 710 million for Bavaria alone. You know, Bavaria is a small southern state near the Alpine region. You see it in the backward. And we, until now, we invested more in Bavaria than the Commission calculated for whole Europe to get this aim. And if you look in the future, we think that we need only in Bavaria 2.4 billion euro, 2,4 Milliarden, to get this aim. So what happened? What happened? And this is the point where Paul Crutzen comes in. We think that we in the past, including all our knowledge and all our scientists, we had to say it very frankly, a completely wrong, underestimating picture of what happened with our world. And this was, I think, the main message of Paul, that he opened our eyes what happened really. And we tried to work with that. So the first time when we talk about the Anthropocene, is the Anthropocene good or bad? So I think it's important to ask this question. It has two sides. I think most of the Anthropocene is very, very good, because all the technology, many things of this what we enjoying here, our video conference, yeah, as bad it is, it's better to meet personally, but our video conference, everything is depending, is a gift of this Anthropocene. So look to the life expectancy in Germany, look to the Human Development Index. I think everybody knows. So I think it's wrong to say, oh, the Anthropocene is a problem. No, it's a real challenge. The other side, the bad side, is when you look to the chemicals in the breast milk of women, for example, this one of billions of slides, yeah, then you see something is happening. So we say that the effects, the positive effects of Anthropocene have side effects, which we don't like. And look to the next picture. These side effects may be so dangerous, so big, that they can ruin the whole positive sides of the Anthropocene. This is the danger. And here is a picture. This picture is 20 years old. From the ruined region of the Ara Lake. Everybody knows this example. I could give you a lot of other examples, you know that. And this is an additional information, additional message. The ruining of the Alzey region, which is a region as large as Germany, which is touched from this very, very critical phenomena. This is long before the climate change was happening. This is a regional change, a change in regional ecology, and we were able to ruin big parts of the world by our work. And this is a whole picture. You know that. I take this picture, unfortunately, most of this is in German, but you see that most of the indicators of our life of the 17 SDG aims is free falling. When we were criticized in our slow development in Water Frame Directive, we say, you're right, it's very slowly we come up very, very slowly. But if you go to biodiversity, if you go to use of areas, they are in free fall worldwide. So I think our work is quite successful, but we are definitely not finished. So what we did is to understand why we do not touch the aims of 2027 for the Water Frame Directive, which has consequences. So in the directives, then, if you don't make it to 2027, you should bring down your aims. So if it's not possible to 2027, it's not possible at all. I think this is the most dangerous political mistake in this wonderful Water Frame Directive. So what we did is to develop this idea, this fantastic idea of Paul Crutzen about the Anthropocene, and develop this into a system that helps us to interpret and work with the Anthropocene in a better way. And simply spoken, we tried to describe three main messages, sub-messages, how this Anthropocene works. And the first one I will shortly explain you are the primary, we called it primary impacts of the Earth's environmental system. What does it mean? We changing the face of our world directly, and this, you see this wonderful picture from the Austrian Environmental Ministry, Water Ministry. You see on the left side a wetland, a wonderful wetland, biodiversity, pure biodiversity, a raw nature, and it is changed, and the engineers quite proud to this right side environment with strict drainage system, and this is able to feed the people. So they were very, very proud to these changes of Anthropocene, but meanwhile we know the side effects. So this is what's happening in our complete world, and this is only one part, changing the appearance of the scenery. Additionally, we introduce pollutants to the rivers, to the grounds. We use the resources, and by the way, we're reducing the biodiversity. And you can see this in a statistic way. If you go to this picture, our rivers mainly have been modified in an extreme way. And if you go to the structures this means more or less clear change. This means strict change in the appearance. So we should be 3 or better, but most of our rivers are mainly overformed. Is it the right English word? Yeah, you understand. But this is only the half of the medal. When you go with me to the next picture, in the core there happened a lot. So 75% of our rivers and lakes are changed extremely, especially the rivers. But if you go to the hinterland, to the riparians and behind that, the picture is extremely. Look here, only less than 10% of the riparian forests are anyway near to a natural status, and the rest is, if you see it from the ecological view, completely ruined. There's nothing left. So this is the truth of what Paul told us. we may not have only a look to the rivers. We have to understand the whole ecological system. This was what Claude Mainzer said. What we mean well understood this system. And I think there is no chance to get the good status in the river if the complete hinterland is, let me say very frankly, or very short, too short, is ruined. Or look to the next picture. These are our recent wetlands. So we completely drained our wetlands, by the way, worldwide. 84% of our wetlands have gone and have changed. And now we're crying and say, oh, we have drought, a problem, a big problem. Now our scenario is a run-off model. This joke works very good in German. Unsere Landschaft ist ein Auslaufmodell. Huh? Only Germans can understand the joke. So this is we try to get every water out of our landscape, and then we're crying about the drought. Or another picture here. We actually renaturalized 2,600 hectares of water. That's fantastic. That's a huge effort since 2001. And in the same time, we make new settlement and traffic areas with about 70,200 hectares. Where is the reason that we do not have everything in good shape? This is my question. And last not least, this picture, we combine our wished investment. This is not politically decided. This is what the technicians say what we should do. This 2.4 billion euro for the next 7 years, together 30 years, with the annual investment in, let me say, not really right, ruining this 12 billion euro only in Bavaria. So this, I think, is our problem. And this is what's happening local or regional. So the primary effects of our doing in the Anthropocene. And to these primary effects in our model, there is a second part, the second impacts. The secondary impacts, we describe the climate change, for example. Yeah, this is something comes from outside. You understand what I mean? Or the ubiquitary chemicals, and maybe also second effects like the extinction of important biology. Go for example, this is a picture of the chemicals. When you take the aims of the Water Frame Directive, we have definitely no surface water in whole Europe which meets the aims. And the reason is alone if you go to the ubiquitary chemistry. So we have altogether more chemistry in our rivers than in this good shape. But this, unfortunately, not the only reason. But go to other points. We even don't know the biology, the animals and plants in the ground, in the floor, yeah, in the soil. We ruining things we do not know what's happening. And this leads me from the secondary impacts to the third message, or to the third understanding. What Paul Crutzen told us is that we do not know a lot of things. So the main part of the Anthropocene is that we a lot of things were happening, but we don't know that. So for example, I give you an example that you understand me. the impact of the fluoride chemicals, so PFAS. Yeah, this is happening. The understanding of chemical dangers in the whole world. That are the biggest chemical accidents we know. And until 10 years ago, we thought that these chemicals are completely undangerous. And meanwhile, we know they are dangerous. So this is a very typical, the climate change, how the climate change began in the industrial area, but now we know what will happen. Or a very simple example, the treatment of soil. We do not know enough from soil. We know nearly nothing from soil compared to that what we should know. So, for example, one question our friend Raoul Weiler opened up in a meeting 14 days before he died, unfortunately. He said, "Oh, Martin, what does glyphosate with the stability of the soil ecosystem? So do we ruining our erosion resilience of the soil? And if we do that together with a couple of other issues, then we have a real problem, because the soil, our very thin skin, is that what we are living more or less from. So, and this comes together with bigger jobs from flash floods and so on and so on. So what we have to learn is that in the time of the Anthropocene, we will learn every day new things. We are confronted with things you never want to know or never want to deal with, but they are long time existing, but now we are learning about it. So the conclusion is, in the Anthropocene, we are in a complete, complex and dynamic system, which has to be stabilized in a dynamic way. So this is the first point we have to understand, that this, I think, is, in my point of view, the main task for surviving of mankind, not more and not less, that we understand that. And Paul Crutzen knew that. So there's one wonderful saying from him when he got all this understanding. He said, it's a problem of the nonosphere, a problem that we understand what we are talking about. Isn't it fantastic? He was not talking about physics and chemics. He was talking about that we have to think about that. Artificial and natural intelligence, Klaus Meinzer. This is what he was talking about. And this is what we have to do our homework. And coming back to the Water Frame Directive, the main mistake of Water Frame Directive is this deadline of 2027. That's crazy. We will have no deadline in fighting for our environment and stabilizing it until the next, let me say, 100 years, maybe 1,000 years. I say, as long as we are on that planet, we have to work for that. Since the time when Paul Crutzen showed us we are in the time of the Anthropocene. This is a very, very tough homework we have to do. And we have to invest at least the same, then we invest in ruining the planet, to say it very short. And so I have to say thank you very much, Paul Crutzen, Paul, for that understanding, for this deep understanding what our aims is. And we published our ideas in English and German, so you see it here. And I say we have a lot to do, and I'm very happy that the European Academy of Science and Arts is speaking about and thinking about that things in the noosphere. That's what we should do. Thank you very much.
We have to thank you for this exciting and engaged contribution. Now, I have a simple question. You are a strong advocate of sustainability, and someone who do not know your position in the ministry, who would never have an idea that in the end you have to defend a certain policy, namely the policy of your ministry. How do you handle this position in the political sphere, in your political Bavarian field? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I think we are on the linchpin between technology, science, and policy. So our main aim is to inform the policy, and this works quite well. So the first is that we implement these ideas, also especially the ideas also from ISP as an institute from IASA to the German and international family. We do this in all ways to get a common technical or administrative understanding of our challenges, aims, and ideas for future, and be sure that all these thoughts are communicated with especially the environmental ministers. So I would say most of the environmental ministers know this background and understand this. The next step is more interesting when it's so when it's communication with the agriculture and with the economy. So then all these ideas find themselves in the real world, let me say. But important is that we know much about that we communicate this, and I think this has an impact, definitely. Not fast enough, of course, of sure, but it has an impact. So this is our work, to understand, to work, and to communicate into the political level.
Okay, thank you. Are there other comments? Yeah, Wolfram Mauser.
Thank you. Martin, I was a bit worried when you said that the greatest misdesign of the Water Framework Directive is the year 2027. Do you think that if we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, which have a similar limit of 2035 until the planet has to be saved, is it also true there? Is this a general problem that we have? Should we say, okay, the solutions should be somewhere in infinity, down in the future? Or aren't we somehow forced to put a strict timeline to it?
I understand completely. So I think it's a political problem of the Water Frame Directive. It has a good side and a bad side. I explain very briefly. The good side is that I have definitive aims, ethical aims, to get it. Yeah. And the good side is to make maybe a 7-year step to say, okay, we try, we make a monitoring, and then we try a review, and then we continue. So that's good. The problem is any way to say, and if we do not make it, we go down with the aims. This is a problem. And so we political try to implement the idea of the Anthropocene in the European policy. That's the point. So our publication is on the European floor, and we circulate this together with our neighbors in whole Europe, with the hope that the world, the Europe, understands the Anthropocene. And in the moment where they understand Paul Crutzen, they understand the complete system and say, okay, we continue the water frame directive. There will be a next and over next planning, and the aims are the right aims. Maybe we need stronger aims, yeah. But we have to continue. And the other point is very important point, that other European directives don't have this clear idea. So for example, the whole nature system is more or less a non-dynamic stabilizing, don't lose too much. And this is the way to lose the whole game. So we should formulate also in nature protection aims. How many wetlands do I need for stabilizing the system? Mathis Wackernagel is speaking about that, yeah, and so on. So I think everybody here knows what I'm talking about. And then going 7 years, and say our policy only has success if they reach these aims, or proves that they do everything to reach these aims. That's a long way, but I think this is the way we have to follow to make this idea. And I think the EASA, the academy, has a very, very important task to make the European scientific level and then the political level understanding what it's on. And Ernst Weizsäcker is with us. He's telling exactly that. And together with Paul Crutzen's new model, new understanding, I think we have, for me, the solution more or less is clear. That's the point. He found us. And for that, again, Paul, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for your contribution and the vivid discussion. And in the beginning of your last comment, you mentioned the importance of ethical goals. And this brings us to our next speaker, Markus Vogt, from class 7 of our academy. And you know, we are one of the few academies in the world which has an academy for world religions. And so we will hear now a talk about the challenges of Christian environmental ethics. And let me mention that Markus Vogt recently published a book exactly on that topic. Please.
So, dear President, dear friends of the European Academy of Sciences and Arts, first of all, I'd like to thank for the honor to speak in this small but high-level audience. And I'm happy to speak with you, to discuss with you. Challenges of Christian environmental ethics in the Anthropocene. It's my topic I'm asked to speak about. Can you see my slides?
Yes,
okay.
Good, fine.
I like to share with you my thoughts in 3 steps. First, what is environmental ethics? Second, types of justification or of ecological ethics. And third, Christian environmental ethics in the Anthropocene. That means the Anthropocene as a new framing of ethical question. President Mainzer just mentioned the book. It's just published, Christian Environmental Ethics. It's quite thick, about 800 pages. And I try to summarize quite short some ideas of that. First, what is environmental ethics? The problem starts with naming, as quite often in many fields of science. Some experts say prefer other terms like natural ethics, bioethics, geoethics, ecological ethics, or eco-social ethics, or ethics of creation. The suspicion against the term environmental ethics is that it might imply a reductive perspective. It's just related to human interests of use. So it is a term that is not as broad as natural ethics. The oldest term is nature or bioethics, related to the phenomenon of life, or geoethics about geoengineering and geosystem approaches. But I prefer the term environmental ethics, because I think the main idea of that is not the reductive perspective, but the relational focus. Environmental ethics is the way which is perceived, experienced, used, and shaped as such by living beings. I think it's nevertheless interesting to see the history of the term environment. It was invented by Jacob von Uexküll, 1909, to characterize a very reductive perspective of organisms like ticks. But I think nevertheless, it's a new term to speak about the relation between living beings and their environment. And I think that's exactly what we have to focus. I prefer the sober concept of environment also because of other reasons. It's a political and international connectable term. We have a Ministry of Environment, we have a movement of environment, and in the international language, environment is the best used term. It is broadly based on and integrates important fields such as technology assessment. For example, natural ethics is not an ethics about technology, but I think it's very important to have a leading concept which includes problem of technology assessment. For that, I prefer the term environmental ethics. Environmental ethics is an examination of the ambivalence of the project of modernity. That's my thesis. In its deepest dimension, environmental ethics is a critical examination of the project of modernity. It's not just dealing with some specific problems of nature protection or of technology assessment, but it's dealing with the problem and the ambivalences of the project of modernity, the idea of progress, the specific idea of rationalism and of science, of technology, of mechanization, and striving for prosperity. Against this background, some say that environmental ethics is something like a counter-discourse of modernity. But others, for example, Ernst Ulrich von Weizsäcker or Ulrich Beck, say that environmental ethics has to be something like an ecological modernization. I decide quite in the middle. It's dealing with the ambivalences of the project of modernity. But I think I sympathize more with the idea of ecological modernization. The main problem of environmental ethics is the naturalistic fallacy. Normative preliminary decisions are hidden in the way seemingly neutral objective facts, and in the way in which they are perceived. Environmental ethics has therefore to be a scientific theoretical, or to use a scientific theoretical approach in order to uncover the perspectivizations and valuations associated with the analytical models used in each case, and to make them accessible to ethical discourse. For example, also the term Anthropocene is not just a neutral description of our world, but it implies a specific evaluation and a specific idea how we have to act or not to act. And I think that ethics has to use a scientific theoretical approach, a critical awareness how we use our language. And that means ethic in the context of science and not just a judgment from outside. The basic methodological question of environmental ethics is located beyond naturalism in the transition from situation description to moral postulates. And that's very often the problem. And we have to be very clear, aware about that transition. And quite often it's hidden, and that means the problem of naturalistic fallacy. Ulrich Beck, my former colleague at the LMU, introduced or coined the idea of socialization of natural processes. Environmental ethics systematically has to do with the socialization of natural burdens, the destruction of natural spaces, as well as the exploitation of natural resources leads to social exclusions and burdens at the same time. Therefore, environmental ethics has to be or to use an eco-social approach. That's also the main idea of Pope Francis in the encyclical Laudato Si. He says we have not two crises, an environmental crisis and a social crisis, but we have only one crisis, an eco-social crisis. And I think it's the same idea, that's the main idea of sustainability, to see the interconnectedness of social problems and environmental problems. That means also that we can, for example, now in our days, not really understand what it's the meaning of justice, the meaning of human rights, without being aware of ecological problems. It is precisely the interweaving of social, that means interpersonal and societal, with ecological processes, that is the subject of environmental ethics in a specific way. That has to deal with problems of complexity, of non-linear interweaving processes. We discussed about the importance of wording. So I think it's very important which guiding ethical principles we use. And I decide in my book for the terms resource justice, intergenerational responsibility, risk literacy, and resilience, animal ethics, and sustainability. To explain that would use a lot of time, but I think nevertheless it's important which term we prefer. And I think that are the main that are very good instruments to discuss the main problems. And I decide also as a methodological axiom that environmental ethics has to be concrete and application orientated. So it has to deal with energy transition, green genetic engineering, consumer ethics, population development, and education for sustainable development. That's the reason why my book is so thick. But I think ethics is not really helpful. It is only abstract. It has to be concrete in the main fields of acting, and there to differentiate between different ideas what we have to do. Let me come to the second part of my short presentation, justification or reasoning types of environmental ethics. I think basically you can use three ideas of reasoning environmental ethics: prudence, happiness, or justice. You can say it's a question of prudence, not to saw off the branch we are sitting on. It's an argument of self-interest in the long run and in a global perspective. Or you can argue it's a question of happiness, to understand, for example, a landscape or nature as part of our identity, as part of the idea of good living with nature and in the nature. That's Angelika Krebs, for example, in relation to Aristoteles. It's an eudaimonistic approach, or Konrad Ott, a philosophical pupil of Habermas. And the third argument is justice. It's a question, whom are we obligate? A question of indebtedness. So it's related to arguments from Immanuel Kant or John Rawls. So I think it's these three types of possible argumentation can you use: prudence, happiness, or justice. The last 50 years of environmental ethics are filled with the discussion about anthropocentric. It started in the year 1969 with John White, and he said, Genesis 1, the idea, the Christian or the biblical idea that human beings have to rule over nature, and that should be the destination of human beings. That, he says, is a cultural root of the ecological disaster of modernity. And in that broad discussion over the last 50 years, we have 4 models: the anthropocentric approach, the pathocentric approach, the biocentric approach, and the physiocentric approach. What does that mean? The anthropocentric approach as ecological, in the context of ecological discussions, means that we have to be responsible for human beings. It's also sustainability is an anthropocentric approach. In the it's defined in Rio. Human beings are at the center of sustainable development. It's a question to use in cleverness nature. And it's just, they say, it's just a problem of to widen the horizons in a temporally and in a room idea. So it's a question of dealing just with future generations and in the global context. Also, the sustainability is an anthropocentric approach, or the constitution of German governments, 1940-1904, is defined a government duty to protect environment in responsibility for future generations. That remains in an anthropocentric approach. The second possibility is a pathocentric approach. The goal is to avoid suffering, taking into account all living beings that can feel pleasure and pain as subjects of their own moral rights. This approach unfolds its concern, especially in the field of animal ethics. The most known representative of this model is Peter Singer, animal liberation. Biocentric approach is aware of the term of life, the idea of life. Every living being has a principally equal right to respect for its basic needs necessary for survival and development. The most quoted sentences in this approach is from Albert Schweitzer, defined 1923 in his book, Culture and Ethics. Reference for life gives me the basic principle of morality, that the good consists in the preservation, promotion, and enhancement of life, and that the destruction, harm, and inhibition of life is evil. Or the fourth possibility, physiocentric approach, also called holocentric or ecological approach. The physiocentric model ties its understanding of nature to religious, mythical, or romantic tradition, and on the basis of seeks on the basis peace with nature. It was formulated by Klaus Michael Meyer-Abis and he relates quite often to the German tradition of Romantic and also of Goethe. Also, in parts, Pope Francis argues in a physiocentric or ecocentric way in combination with the anthropocentric way. Let me summarize for you my own position in 7 steps, quite short. I think the first is clear. Nature has an intrinsic value. It has brought forth man and will overlast him. The question of its usefulness, therefore, concerns only a relatively narrowly defined aspects of the human relationship to nature. Second, the second argument, the aesthetic, mystical, or ontological quality claimed for nature as such can never be detached from its relation to the culturally mediated forms of perception of the human subject. That means, and the third argument is quite important, that means only man can be subject of moral responsibility, and thus the addressee of moral appeals. He has an unconditional dignity, not on the basis of a certain naturally tangible characteristics that can also be attributed to other living beings or natural things, but as a person, and thus as a moral subject called to freedom and responsibility. I think that's quite important. My thesis is everyone who has a real idea what ethic means, what means human being as a moral subject, what means freedom, what means acting in, and which is not just behavioral, an exact idea of ethic means that we cannot or we have to be to follow a methodological model of anthropocentric. We cannot do an ethics just without the idea of freedom and the idea of humanity. The fourth argument, Christian ethics can counter the environmental ethics criticism that not the anthropocentrism as such, but rather the loss of theological connection in the secular anthropocentrism of modern times has led to the one-sided instrumental relationship to nature. But so the theological approach is not anthropocentric, but theocentric. But nevertheless, the anthropological approach has to learn a lot. That's my fifth argument. We need something like ecological enlightenment. Ernst Ulrich von Weizsäcker spoke about also about this. Now we live not in an empty world, but in full world. And that's a new framing of our understanding the destination of man. Yes, but I think that's on the level of the criteria of ethics and not on the level of a totally new ethics. And I think it's very important that we don't lose the fundament of modern, of enlightenment, as a mod of human rights in the ethical approach. Sixth, the depth dimension of ecological ethics is an inquiry of anthropology. We need a better understanding of man. It demands that humans understand themselves and you as natural beings, as part of nature, and overcome dualistic conceptions. That has also consequences for understanding human rights. I think we need a new ecological framing of understanding human rights. But my PhD, I wrote about social Darwinism. And so I know how dangerous it is if we have ethics without human rights. And also the idea of democracy needs the idea of human rights. And that's not the same as a natural ethics. And the last argument, the core of the challenge is not the determination of a new center of ethics, but a new way of thinking. This can be described as interconnectedness. We called it that in the advisory board for the German government, the Environmental Advisory Board, retinity, from retina, from our eyes, that mean to think in the way of interconnectedness of complex systems. It is the key principle of ethics in the claim of sustainability. Let me summarize this part with a map of natural ethics. The key question is, what is the value of nature? Two possible answers. Nature has an instrumental value or an intrinsic value. The argument instrumental value is an anthropocentric argument, but also partly intrinsic value can be anthropocentric in the model of eudaimonistic approaches. This can be aesthetic or religious holiness, or the argument of identity, landscapes as part of our identity. Or it can, the idea of intrinsic value of nature can be a moral intrinsic value. That means the sentient nature, so suffering argument, Peter Singer, purposive nature, a teleological argument, that is Hans Jonas, ecological metaphysics, also Robert Spemann, or whole nature, a holistic argument. That are the possibilities. Let me come to my third and last part of the presentation. Christian environmental ethics in the Anthropocene, or the Anthropocene as a new framing of ethical questions. We just spoke about the noosphere. It's a context, it's a term which was created in the 1920s by Teilhard de Chardin. And not many know that the coining of the term Anthropocene had precursors in theology. For example, Antonio Stoppani in 1867, so more than 150 years ago, he spoke about the Anthropozoicum. 3 years later, Ernst Haeckel used this term. Or in the 1920s, there was a circle in Paris, also with theoretical geological scientists and system thinkers about system approaches. And Teilhard de Chardin, he spoke about the Anthropocene and the noosphere, and also Hubert Markel in the 1990s. The core statement of that precursors of the concept of Anthropocene is, with man, a new dynamic has come into the history of evolution. It's a new framing, a cognitive change in the self-perception of man. At the same time, a diagnosis, a prophecy, a warning, a hope, and appeal. And my thesis is, without that background, we cannot win an exact meaning of the idea of Anthropocene. And I'm curious to learn more how exact Paul Crutzen did know that background, but I suppose that he did know. Also Bruno Latour in his book Kampf Gaia, Struggle for Gaia. So he deals with the Anthropocene, and he says the Anthropocene means settling down in the ruins of modernity. So that comes back to my idea that environmental ethics is dealing with the ambivalences of modernity. And quite sharp, Gerten and Schellhuber formulate this idea. The state of the Earth system in the Holocene area, that is in the past nearly 12,000 years, is the only one that mankind has experienced in its history of civilization today. This favorable state is at risk. So I think the term is not neutral, but it produces a high pressure to act. But I think the main idea is it's not possible to answer with this high appeal to act just with ecological imperatives, but it's more a new idea of self-understanding of man. It has to go deeper in our cultural self-understanding. It's a reframing of environmental discourses through the Anthropocene, new time horizons, deep dynamics of change processes, changes in society as a whole, the great transformation, or with Ortwin Renn, risk-taking as guiding concepts of ethics for the Anthropocene. He speaks about the risiko paradox, why we fear the wrong things. And I think we need a new idea of risk management. Or, as I just said, a new idea of human rights. I think Professor Mainzer at the beginning spoke about also the judgment in April from the German Bundesverfassungsgerichts. And they say the Anthropocene needs a new idea of freedom. Climate protection is a necessary precondition of the idea of the fighting for human rights and for freedom, to protect freedom in our times. And I think that's the new framing of our main idea of our social contract in our times. The goal of ethical reflection is not only, and perhaps not even in advance, an instruction for action, but the work on a framework of thought that also includes a second order knowledge, consequently a reflection on how to think appropriately about this phenomenon in the first place. The Anthropocene concept has the potential to become the most relevant philosophical, religious, anthropological, and political concept in moving away from the terms of like modernity, so Bruno Latour. Or another, Klaus Heidel, in his book, Living in the Anthropocene, that's formulated against the background of the ecumenical movement for metanoia for life. He says, we need something like a new reformation, not like 500 years ago, dividing the churches, but bringing together the churches in the common care for creation. And ecological reformation is it what we need. He says, it is a high time that societies around the world make addressing the ethical issues in the Anthropocene a priority. Justice today must be spelled out as a question of planetary relations, of collaboration and distribution. Reconciliation with the earth is a new question of justice, a new framing of understanding human rights. Or another, Guardini, he formulated also 50 years ago a quite interesting idea. Taming the power, he says, is it what we need? The idea of our culture in the last 500 years was expansion of power. Yeah? And he says now we are in a situation that this idea tips over into its opposite without reclamation of power over power. So we have to regain the power over power. So the idea of intelligent self-limitations. And he says something quite similar to the idea of the Anthropocene, that the biblical idea of the domination, man's domination over nature, is now reality in the context of modern technology, but it's quite dangerous. It's an idea in the danger to tip over into its opposite. And that's not quite different to what Paul Crutzen say. I quote, the idea of the Anthropocene is also developing into a metaphor for the relationship between nature and man. The latter was initially at the mercy of nature. This changed with the growth of the world's population due to medical and technological advances. Mankind increased its power over nature. This is the distinguishing mark of the Anthropocene era. But if we just keep increasing our power, both nature, humanity will become losers. I think that's the same idea as the idea from Guardini 50 years ago. Another way of being in the world. That's a formulation of Eva Horn in her introduction in the Anthropocene. Thinking in the Anthropocene aims at thinking human life forms and no non-human beings as a common context. According to Eva Horn, the concept of the Anthropocene is about nothing more and nothing less than another way of being in the world. It is important to understand the human being no longer as a crone of creation, but as a participant of networks. We are networks within networks. Or to come to an end with that idea, I think one of the most interesting books about the ethical ethical dimension of the Anthropocene is from Cliff Hamilton, Defiant Earth. He formulates the failure of the Enlightenment's grand narrative of progress in the Anthropocene, its slide into a technological mania of feasibility and into the economic immoderation of modernity, in other words, poses anew the old ethical question of freedom and responsibility. It is no longer just about the relationship of humans to each other, but also about the relationship of Homo sapiens to the earth. And the last, just the conclusion of that all, what does it mean for the European Academy? I think there is a fundamental tension between the ethical approach and a technological and scientific approach, because our technological scientific society or civilization is the reason for the ecological disaster. But at the same time, that's very important, the scientific approach and technological approach is a necessary part of the solution. Renunciation alone is not enough. In history, it was primarily technological inventions that lead to environmental relief. And that's my conclusion. I think very often ethical approach is identified to say what we are not allowed to do. But I think that's not enough. We need an ethical approach connected with the idea of innovation. The idea to use our scientific and technological abilities to have a better relation to nature. So an idea of innovation, offensive, creative, and risk sensitive. And that's, in my opinion, quite near to the originally meaning of creativity or creation. It was invented in 2,500 years ago to say the destination of man is to be cooperator of God in terms of creativity. God can create new things, and also man has to create new things. And I think quite often we identify ethics and especially environmental ethics just to say what we are not allowed to do. But I think to connect it with the idea of transition, transformation of society, metanoia, of new thinking, and that is quite important for a new idea of Christian environmental ethics. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you very much for this very impressive talk. And especially your last remarks are very important for our academy. And you brought it to the point exactly from my point of view. That is the message of our academy, to bring together the humanities with the technological scientific efforts. And so in the end, maybe that is the profile of our academy, what we can perhaps call responsible innovation. What does it mean? And we have the class you belong to. I think that is also very special for academy. That is not usual to have a class of world religions, humanities, that is always in an academy. And so to bring this broad view together with our technologies and sciences, I think that is a great challenge for the future. But here I will stop with my spontaneous comments as president of this academy. I think there are a lot of other comments from our colleagues here. Yeah, William Danka.
Dear President, thank you very much. Marcus Vogt, thank you. Congratulations for your presentation. I have two questions. The first, do you know any relationship between Paul Crutzen and Laudato Si? Is there any influence of his thought in the topics of Laudato Si? This is the first question. And the second one, I'm not so okay with the title of your book, Christian and Environmental Ethics, because ethics is ethics. Christian and environmental, so is a limitation, it seems to me, of ethics. Or so changing the title, I could say Christian and environmental thought or reflections, or I don't know, in other way, because ethics is a universal approach to the reality, to the life, to the existence. Therefore, Christian and environmental is a little bit, it seemed to me, so like an imitation. How do you comment this title? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you for your interesting questions. I don't know about a direct relationship or dialogue between Pope Francis and Crutzen, but I know Pope Francis studied chemistry, and he was very interested, especially in chemistry, so and in natural sciences. So I'm quite sure that he knowed Paul Crutzen. And I know that there were indirect relationships, for example, with Schellhuber. And Schellhuber, he gave advices to Pope Francis in writing the encyclical Laudato Si. And from that background, from the institute in Potsdam, there are many thoughts of that influence encyclica, and many say that we have no other encyclica with such an intensive dialogue between natural sciences and theology. And the second question was the title. Yes, I know naming is every time a problem, but and I think nevertheless I like the term ethics. But I know that many think or think that ethics, or what I mean with ethics, is ethics in the context of science. Ethics as an ability of moral judgment and not a moralization. And but an idea of ethics in the dialogue with empirical research. But nevertheless, I think many say we have to follow just objective, descriptive perspective. But I think, for example, what I said about the Anthropocene, it has a lot of moral implications and evaluations. And I think what I try to do to make transparent the ways we judge and we evaluate things. And that means quite often to be critical about the normal ways of evaluation. But I think what we need is, especially in the environmental context, because we have a very, very strong imperatives to be critical, transparent, and methodological reflected in dealing with that moral imperatives.
Okay, thank you. Other comments? And okay, that's not the case. Then thank you again.
Michael von Hauff.
Ah, Michael von Hauff. I couldn't see it.
Marcus, thank you. I agree totally with you, and we had a lot of discussions. Are there incentives to follow your path? Maybe it's a typical question of an economist, and if it's so, then I take my question back, but maybe you have an answer.
I tried to say it in the last slide about the idea of ethics of innovation. Ethics which includes potentials of our technological abilities, of our ideas of scientific research. And I think we can show that also empirically in a historical analysis, that the main effect of ethics was every time then it goes along with new technological ideas. And not, for example, Karlovitz had the idea of sustainability, but what really helped to preserve the woods were not that moral imperatives, but their connection with the idea of coal. And the new idea of coal and new technology helped to survive the woods. And I think that's what we need also in our time, new cultural, new ethical ideas in connection with new technological ideas. And I think that's the main incentive. And I think what I understand or what I try to formulate as a program of ethics is not just the producing moral imperatives, but more reframing our ideas of society and guiding ideas of that. And I think that's very important, that we have not anti-modernity discourse in environmental ethics, but that we have a discourse of modernization of modernity, like Ernst Ulrich von Weizsäcker says it.
Okay. Yes, and in the end, I think that was also a claim in the last part of your talk, the concept of responsibility. Elsewhere, you mentioned that only humans are able here on this planet Earth to take responsibility in the end for even for the nature and the future of this planet. And by his or her intelligence, he should also use the opportunities of innovations, technical creativity to take this kind of responsibility. And so coming back again from my point of view in this position, to connect these concept of responsibilities with the innovation power nowadays, that I think is a challenge for academy like ours. Now, are there other comments? Let me look. That's not the case. Then we come to the final part, last but not least. Our honorary president, Felix Unger, will find some final words and especially announce the mentioned Paul Crutzen medal. Please, Felix.
Also, we have to thank you and to congratulate you for moderating this very interesting, inspiring meeting. By the way, I learned a lot out of it. The papers have been all very good prepared, presented, and with a lot of content. Thank you very much that you have done it. But all together, it was a row of papers which were contributing to address the benefits and ways of thinking of Paul Crutzen. Paul Crutzen was indeed a unique character, and I had the pleasure meeting him twice. One was in Abu Dhabi. We had a long 3 days together, and we had a lot of chances to speak together. And I could explain him the essence of the academy, and he was really inspired. And what he said me, that was more or less his main message. All what we are doing, it must be defined in a clear, distinct way, not complicated, so that the other people can understand it. And in that way, when people can understand it, then immediately it's going to be used and the people is going to follow it. That was very, very important. You was since 2000 honorary, it's a year 2000 honorary member of our academy until he passed away. And he liked the academy very much. And he has seen in the interdisciplinarity a future of the life of sciences. And it was for him clear that all the things have to be defined and to be spoken clearly. He was the fact that we were thinking on technosciences, and technosciences is nothing else as a combination of the technical sciences together with medicine, with the arts, in all all what is dealing with men. And I think this is a very interesting and a very well taken concept to speak on technosciences. But the main message what I would like to leave is that he was such an outstanding man and scientist, and his character should be an example for motivation to the next generation. And that was the reason why we thought it's important to make such a motivation by awarding Paul Crutzen medals. It's a sign that somebody is going to be now in modern technology with COVID inaugurated with interdisciplinarity, with a large thinking and so on. And this needs, it's necessary to have a classical pathway how to go through. And I think I will propose it to our president. We should do it in the same way as we have done it with Tolerance Prize. We form a group of experts dealing with these topics, and we have this group, and then we will make a call that people should apply for it, and then this group should select one being the member for a Paul Crutzen medal, which is handed over at the next General Assembly. This would be hopefully in March 22nd. And it's necessary to have this way because we have to select a good candidate. That's all my message. What I have to say, I have to thank you. And we are working now on preparing the Paul Crutzen medal. and you will be informed by all small steps, so that in the hope that you will intervene and say what we can do better. Thank you very much for all, and I think the most incentive is to favor and to honor the thinking of Paul Crutzen in form of a medal, that people should think simple and in an interconnected way, and promising that in this way they will have more successes when they are sticking to direct lines. That's all my message. I have to thank you. Thank you for participation, and it was an interesting long afternoon. Thank you very much.
Okay, Felix.
Plenum finitum.
Yeah, thank you very much for your nice words in the end. And let me mention, we will continue on this line, not only the medal. I got a message from colleagues in Poland. They want to prepare a conference on climate change and energy for autumn with our academy. And so we will continue our discussion. I look forward to this event. And so have a nice weekend, and we will continue with our work in this way. Thank you very much for your participation, but especially for the exciting contribution of our speakers. And to you, you heard already, we will have a video, I think, anyway. Our conference will be online, and so people who could not take part this afternoon will have a chance to do that in the near future. Thank you very much, and all the best.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Good.